It's not that AI replaces people, it's that there are things that AI needs people. It can't replace emotions, it can't replace some of that logic, that feeling, that energy, that gut that humans have.
40% of the friction and the problems that occur from a technical architecture, landscape and workflow perspective are due to poor quality data.
20 to 30% of enterprise revenue is lost due to data efficiency or poor data.
Once you go beyond the kind of single user Teams version and you start integrating these tools with your existing technology stacks, then you're in the world of APIs and token consumption, which is a whole nother ballgame.
The more you know about somebody, the more well-researched you are, the more that you get that inner workings of somebody and why they tick and their energy and what they do.
We had big chunks of change, but they were slower to be adopted and implemented. This stuff is going to hit us like a tsunami.
So welcome back to Build with Dean, where we explore what it really takes for founders, scale-ups and executives to grow in today's AI-driven world. So every week, as you know, we dig into strategies, tools and leadership insights that help you stay visible, credible and also in demand. So today I'm joined by a powerhouse in this space, Mahmood Aziz. Mahmood is the founder of Mind Intelligence, a fractional executive and strategic advisor who works with SaaS and technology companies from 1 million to 50 million in revenue, helps founders, boards and leadership teams to design growth strategies and unlock sales performance, to integrate AI and automation into their businesses, and ultimately to remove the blockers that stop companies from reaching their potential or their goals. So across his career, Mahmood's worked internationally in strategic governance, transformation, sales, leadership, blending commercial with deep experience in technology and operations. So the full kit and caboodle. In this conversation, we'll unpack the real questions leaders are asking right now, such as, is AI really a game changer or is it just another tool? How do you build sales and marketing engines that still work in an AI-saturated world, for example? Why data, ethics, and governance matter more than they ever have, and where leaders should focus if they really feel like they've missed the boat on AI. So let's dive in. Mahmood, welcome.
Thank you very much, Dean. I almost didn't recognize myself with that intro, so it's great what the power of great marketing does.
Indeed. So let's start with AI then. Just a tool or transformation? Where do you see where we are with AI?
This is a really interesting point, but I'm going to preface it with something that everyone needs to understand. And that is, we're not seeing anything new. The techniques, principles, the way software has been organized and works, all these things have been around for more than 50 and 60 years. It's just in the past, they've been hidden under different guises. So, for example, operational research was one such area where the tools and techniques using mathematic algorithms and so on were applied to large data sets. And I think, if you go back to any government statistics, for those of us in the UK, the ONS have been providing some amazing outputs, and a lot of what they do has been built on the principles that are being in use for what we're talking about. So when we talk about, the question about AI being a tool or a transformation, it's not an either or. They're not mutually exclusive. And I think people have to understand that we are in another phase of technology. These come along quite regularly. When I had hair, going back quite a long distance away, I was transforming stuff from ledgers and books into computerized systems. So that was the first wave of what is now known as enterprise resource planning, or ERP. The likes of SAP and Oracle made their initial billions off the back of systems like that. And we've then had similar things, I would say, the mobile revolution, the internet revolution. These were, I think, quite large, significant step changes in what we've been seeing for the last 60, 70 years. In fact, some may say, if you're a proper, historian, you may say, well, when the person first picked up a rock and or a flint or something and did something with it to carve out a piece of dirt, It's a tool.
Yeah.
And from that perspective, AI is a tool. However, like with the piece of rock, it had the ability to transform what people are doing and how they did it. And that's why I say it's not either or. And one must think about this as saying, if we're going to use this properly, we've got to overcome two things. And the first of those is, like any tool, it has limitations. Do we understand what those limitations are? I suspect for many of us who are on this call and people beyond, we hear what we hear, we see what we see. We tend to take at a surface level what it seems to be doing. But behind the scenes, there's an awful lot of information that all of the big L&M providers publish, and most software companies always, right, in terms of documentation and do's and don'ts. But it's only when you go into places like Reddit and forums and other places, you really see what works and doesn't work. But for most of us in business, commercial reality is that we're so busy running our actual thing that we do. Whether you're a solopreneur, whether you're part of a 3-4-man partnership or something, or you're a professional services firm, or you're a bigger software company, you're so busy doing what you're doing. Do we ever have time to understand limitations? And that segues nicely onto the next piece, which is our own personal limitations, right? We go and use tools and we don't realize we've got our limits, whatever they may be. And for that reason, AI fits into that world of how well do I know it, and what is it that I should use it for, and where should I not use it for? And this is an interesting topic, right? This is a very important question for all of tech, but more so for AI, because as when Google came along, 18 or years ago or so, doesn't seem that long, but it changed everything, right? Suddenly we had access to so many more places and spaces in the world in a nice, easy to find. For those of you who, played around with the Netscape browser and Alta Vista and other original, the Excite and Yahoo, going back into the blast from the past, they were hard to navigate and find stuff. And then Google suddenly made it really simple. We had pages and pages of answers where we could go, and we were spoiled for choice. And we're in that honeymoon phase. And I dare say many people are already falling into some kind of disillusionment, or it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. It doesn't work well for me when I ask it.
Yeah.
And there are a number of reasons for that. The first one is obviously, like with everything, the more you pay, the better it works, right? There's no secret why. For those people who just want, have the free version, you do 2-3 queries, you've got access to good models, but basic compared to what's out there now. Whereas if you're paying the £200-300 or the enterprise, thousands a month, you've got access to things in a different way and at a speed many of us can't imagine, right? So that's the first thing. The other thing that is really important around it is it's prone to errors. We've all seen the humorous responses, right? Someone sold a chatbot sold a car for $1 in the States, right? Because someone knew enough to game the system to get it to agree to a discount, and it was honored, right? Then there have been instances where I'm not going to name who it is, but there was a lawyer who was in a hurry and asked ChatGPT or similar for some information, and it came out with some case references for him, took it to court, and of course it was all made up, hallucinatory stuff. So we're getting examples of people being caught out by the limitations. So it's important to note that we've got to be careful about how to introduce technology going forward, because as we said at the beginning, it is a tool, but it's also transformative, and all businesses need to be able to understand their limits, the tools limits, so that they can figure out what they want to use it for and why it's important for them at this particular stage of their business. So
Sure. So
it
there's a
is
lot.
going to. Sorry, Dean, go ahead.
So there's a lot there to unpack the different levels of what what you've just said there. So there's also taking into account that that sometimes it's not in terms of the individual's limitation, just the cost, but actually how you engineer your your relationship with AI in terms of the result that you get. But you're right; it's fascinating in terms of what's available and what the limitations are. And I think a lot of people felt AI was going to be this kind of, it was going to solve everything. It was going to be amazing. And then actually, what's happened is it's kind of a bit of an anticlimax in a way. Um, for some, and for others, fascination. So everybody looks through a different lens, but for a lot of people, an anticlimax, and maybe it's not going to do what it said it was going to do on the tin. But I think it depends which lens you look through, and there's a lot of investment
Yes.
going in. So the likelihood is that the result will come out in the wash eventually. Just takes
Here's
longer.
another interesting point of view, a perspective for everyone, and that is we're throwing the term around, um, you know, very, very blasé. But like the term digital before it, 10, 12 years ago, I suspect if you ask somebody to say, what do you understand by AI? Out of 1,000 people, you'll probably get 999 different answers. Maybe two people might have the same. And this is another interesting perspective to take for all you business folks out there, saying, we've come to make the use of ChatGPT and the LLM synonymous with AI. That's absolutely wrong, right? So when we look at it, there are so many more different facets to the term artificial intelligence. And we've got to be careful. And I urge everyone to go away and do a bit more digging, just a little bit, right? The techniques used, LLMs are good for one thing. For one of two or three things, right? They're really good at what they do, but they are not amazing at doing something that requires a lot of compute power, a lot of kind of thinking about predictive algorithmics, and then saying what's actually going to happen. And it's built off the back of pre-existing artificial intelligence work. So most of it, and there are something like 13 algorithmic patterns used in AI. And most of what AI and in the LLMs in ChatGPT and Claude and Perplexity and Google Gemini and so on are about pattern matching and neurolinguistics, right? So they're taking the NLP part of, but then you've got the vision stuff, which they're getting better at. So recognizing images. There was a great example the other day. I went to a conference of local business people here, and one of the guys presenting, he put up 10 images and asked everybody in the audience, can you tell me which is AI and which is real? Now, I'm ashamed to say, even me, I got 50% wrong, right? So it just goes to show the power and speed at which it's doing
Well,
things.
I think as well when you factor in the content side of things that actually there's more video and there's more technology and it's coming thicker and faster. So we'll be in a world where you or I can make a video, and no one will know whether that's us or not. Like
Sure.
seriously, you'll things like blockchain around content. And the value of that content, etc., is a conversation that most of our viewers won't even. A blockchain? What do you mean? Like grabbing an AI? Yeah, but seriously, that's got to be a thing that factors in because the authenticity of content in that AI world, becomes a big factor. Um,
Definitely.
Fascinating, isn't it? So, how much of it is hype and how much of it is reality? If thinking of business owners and people who might need to be implementing that. There are going to be some people who are watching. I'm absolutely sure some big businesses even who maybe haven't even implemented. Although I'd factor that with a stat from the Bank of England: 75% of financial services firms already use AI within their business. 75%. I thought that was quite a big number for financial services because of compliance and the
No,
hallucinations
no,
that you were
not
just
at all.
talking about. So if that's true, the likelihood is that everybody started to adopt that, right? But I don't know if that's true.
So look, I'm speaking to a lot of people, as you are. We've had plenty of conversations. I think 2014, I remember having a chat with some partners from one of the big four. And we were looking and saying, at the time I was working with an AI startup, right, which is all about much better predictive analytics at the time. And he said, I don't think at that time, 10, 12 years ago, that maybe 2 or 3% of the global boards have an inkling of what AI is, right? It's not even on their radar. Fast forward, the 12 years since, I think nearly everybody understands there's something out there. But if you ask still medium and large boards, how imperative is it to implement and adopt AI in their business for business transformation? I would say it's still behind other things, right? Whether it's cloud services, architecture, or data, from a technology perspective, or from bigger decisions like, where are we going to sell? What products do we have? What's the price mix? How's our staff challenges coming along? There's a big problem with skills, essentially as well, that's underpinning some of the technology transformation or the speed at which it's happening.
Yeah.
And equally, there was an MIT report, I think literally 3 weeks ago, where they looked at what's happening, and they're saying that 95% of kind of AI pilots are not meeting the marks or goals that were expected, i.e. giving them the failure tag, which on the face of it seems like, oh, that's rather a lot. However, I think that has to be tempered with, they only looked at pilots and they looked at a narrow scheme of things, and they had a very narrow scope in terms of who they looked at. Because by all means, if you look at the general population, right, even my dad and some relatives abroad that I would never imagine, they're having conversations. I'm seeing, people on TikTok and Instagram and even LinkedIn, where they're showcasing ordinary people using ChatGPT in conversation mode and embedding it into their daily work, right? So I would argue that we're getting a huge amount of adoption, but it's coming like almost like the PDF route, where things are being adopted by the people rather than enterprises top down.
Well, it's interesting that because a Deloitte survey found that 9 million people in the UK have used generative engines at work.
Yeah,
9 million.
incredible.
I mean, that's a big number because of the workforce, the mass of the workforce probably are not in a place to use AI and
Yeah,
generative. So it's actually an even bigger number that. But I think as well, the when you think about these big enterprises, sometimes the underwhelmedness of what AI has done in the early adoption and implementation for some of those businesses,
yeah,
it's surely probably going to be more about the data that they have anyway. And so you're going to understand this thinking from an ERP background. It would be one area, but the data that you have in sales and operations and in production and in warehousing and all of the different numbers that a business relies on. And when I used to many years ago work in currency, and people would always say, I used to say to people, okay, well, we'll give us your data and we'll work out how we can, protect you from losing money against currency. And they'd say, oh, you don't want to rely on my ERP data.
yeah, yeah.
You can't rely on my sales data, my sales team. No, can't rely on my marketing data, can't rely on my ops data, etc. So I think data data is going to be a huge problem, right?
Well, listen, look, if you look at the inefficiencies in UK PLC, and I've been in data since 2008, 7, I would say, right? So coming up to almost 20 years, 2 decades. Every boom, bust, transformation cycle in technology has been underpinned by how quickly people could leverage what was available to them in the form of data, right? And clearly there is you mentioned it earlier in terms of, why we want some kind of validity of where content comes from online, especially with image and video generation being available to the masses. That wasn't the case before. All of the LLMs have been trained on huge amounts of data. All right,
Mm.
petabytes and petabytes, and they've done it for many, many years. I can't remember how many years OpenAI was absorbing stuff before it came out and said we're ready to have something that we can give to the public. I think it was like 7, 8 years worth of training, maybe more. And Google bought DeepMind back in the day, an obscure British company for 400 million pounds, which was unheard of, right? The
Mm.
British company, technology company went for that much, but it was the fundamentals of building a lot of the current, ability to think about deep thinking and deep research that the LLMs are now using. But it was done because they had access to vast amounts of data. For most ordinary companies, the challenge of data has always been a problem. The point I
Mm.
was going to make about UK PLC is that 40% of the friction and the problems that occur from a technical architecture, landscape, and workflow perspective are due to poor quality data.
I think just on that, there's a stat here I have from Gartner. So 20 to 30% of enterprise revenue is lost due to data efficiency or poor data. 20
Yeah.
to 30% of all revenue in enterprise.
Now that's a really interesting point because it's not just the revenue side. What you got to look at is the opportunity cost of the
Mm.
remediation and other things that people have to do. People create workarounds because the data just doesn't work in the same way that they want it to. And then they go out and build some homegrown systems or they use Excel spreadsheets. And then we're into the areas of, human error, transposition, transmission, whatever, all emission, right? All sorts of things. So the issue for all technology, not just AI more than most, but the issue for all technology is it's got to have good data. And it's been a problem ever since time immemorial when someone made the wrong entry in a column and thought, oh crap, how do I mitigate this? I have to rub it out and start again, right? It was easy when we had, slates and
It's
chalk,
it's the
but
old Excel thing in the financial department. One wrong
absolutely.
cell can cause havoc.
Yeah, absolutely, right. And many a number, auditors have made mistakes because I was part of it, right? We made mistakes back in the day with certain companies, and then ultimately the company failed, right? So it was a very large insurance company. I won't tell you who, but that will date me as well. But those errors in data, there's another side of it. If you look at many small boards and medium-sized companies, right, what sets really good ones apart from people who struggle more is how quickly they can make decisions based on the evidence they're given, right? So they've got access to good tools that are built on good data sources, and they understand where the provenance of data comes from. Decisions get made faster, they lead to better outcomes and quicker results, and ultimately better ROI. And this is something else that people have to imagine that everything they've been doing, we've shifted a lot more from manual, paper, verbal processes to things that are now digital, right? Email, a lot of call transcripts are available digitally, documentation, proposals, purchasing, there's a lot of stuff now that's available to companies. And I would urge everybody to take a look and say, what can we learn? How can we get insights from data? Right, and start from there. AI is a good way of doing it, but there are many other tools, right? People put in CRMs, they put in the ERPs, they put in some marketing automation, they might do some supply chain management, lots of things. Ultimately, understanding your business is built off the back of data now more than it ever used to be. And I've been doing a lot of work
Mm.
with accountants for 2 or 3 years. Now, you would expect accountants to be really good at understanding their numbers and financials and operational evidence. But frequently, like with everyone else who's in a medium-sized business, they're so busy dealing with client queries and managing the team and the staff and everything else that they also struggle to figure out where everything is and how to bring it to the fore to understand. Here's an interesting question. Let me ask you, and you're a solopreneur as well, and a businessman with multiple interests, right? So all the things that you're involved in, and I know, I hope this isn't a leading question because I know you're quite good at this, but for many of your compatriots and peers and the people you've worked for, how many of them could answer with evidence who their top 10 customers by margin were,
Mm.
right?
Well,
Are we profitable with the people we think are our top customers? Interesting question, right? But that relies on understanding a number of different things. But if you've got good data, that should flow quite easily.
I think this is the problem that a lot of companies have is that, you know, we're fast approaching and, there's a race, there's a clock that's ticking to implement AI. And those that do it faster are going to leverage, on paper, leverage the opportunity. Those that can implement it, and use, take that IP and then run with that.
Right.
Yeah. So what about data security then?
So here's an interesting thing, right? If you are using the free version of any of the tools, right, most of them automatically assume that you are happy for that data to be public. So anything you're putting in as a prompt and the output to that prompt, or if you share something, even if you upload something, that becomes fair game, legitimate interest use for all of the LLM providers. So this is something, so I will urge anybody in business, at the very least, get the first paid tier, because that offers you an option to then tell the tool, I don't want my data and queries and chats used for training purposes, right? It's true for Google, for Anthropic, for Perplexity, and for ChatGPT and many of the others, right? So one thing you also have to check in your settings, terms and conditions, license agreements, all the rest of it, like any other, technology piece. What are you signing up to and agreeing? The next step is think about it this way. If you don't want any information shared with the world, don't put it online. That applies to social media, right? Videos,
This is a
pictures.
really interesting subject, though, Mahmood, isn't it?
It
Because
is.
how do you control that when individuals, 9 million of them, are
Yeah.
the ones who are driving the information that's going onto those channels? I mean, that at some point there is going to be that conversation of, security and, what people are putting out there that maybe they they have, they're allowed to, or they should be, or they shouldn't be.
Sure.
Like, it's really interesting how that's going to play out.
I think, a lot of it is down to, I think, company leaders, owners, shareholders, directors, all these kind of people. Um, Firstly, it goes back to that limitation problem we talked earlier. If you don't know that your data gets shared when it's free, ask yourself the question, what am I comfortable with in terms of company information being online somewhere and then being passed back to the LLM providers? So that's the first question. The second question is, what can I do about it? What should I do about it? And that is much more about every business leader today must put in place some kind of AI policy and usage policy for their staff, right? Absolutely nailed on. If you haven't got it, why not? Especially if 9 million of you are using tools out there.
Is
And
it
here's
much?
the interesting thing,
Is
right?
it?
So,
Let me ask you this:
sure.
is it much ado about nothing? Because we have social media, right? We've had the
Yeah.
internet. We've had this. How do you control your employees? And maybe there's a social media policy for some businesses. Others don't even care about it. So, is it much ado about nothing?
So and this comes back to another topic we're going to touch on later, which is about ethics and responsibility and
Hmm.
responsible use of AI, right? It's two sides of the same coin. The privacy angle is another part of that conversation, right? So you talked about data security or security with AI tools, and I'm adding in the concepts of both ethics and also privacy.
Hmm.
If you're using it on your personal device and then you want an answer to put into your work stuff, I think that's down to a personal choice. But like with all other, company provided equipment and assets, typically that goes along with some kind of company responsible use, right? And I think it's down to whether one is in place. I think with smaller companies, they don't tend to have as strict a policy. There might be some safeguards and guidelines and whatever, but if you're under, 20 staff, maybe you don't have something. But certainly, if you're up to 100 staff and so on, we're seeing more and more people having, provisions, company laptops, company mobile phones, all the rest of it. And then the traditional, what I call cyber security and network security and Wi-Fi security built on top of it, and some kind of sign a document. Here's our, fair uses policy for the equipment. I
Yeah.
think in those circumstances, you've got to separate out people using their private devices and company devices. If you're using the company device, the owners and leaders and directors of a company should have some kind of policy because ultimately it's their fiduciary duty. Now, I'm an ex-auditor, so I look back and think
Mhm.
of things from the point of view of assuredness, risk, business continuity, control, all the rest of it. You would not, if you're living on the Old Kent Road, for example, sorry for the people who live in Old Kent Road, right? But back in the 80s and 90s in London, the Old Kent Road was a no-go area and you couldn't leave your door open. And as visiting friends and student digs, the first thing he did was put triple bolts on. So if you're in an area where it's easy to get at stuff, would you leave your front door open? And that's the question
That's
you've got to
why
ask
it was
yourself.
cheap on the Monopoly board.
Amazing. Yes. Right. But it's that same question. If you feel secure in your environment,
Yeah.
and how many people technology feel secure in their environments today? We're seeing more and more cybersecurity attacks on websites, on servers, on IPs, DDoS. We're seeing more ransomware and malware. We're seeing more phishing attempts. I've had numerous phone calls, WhatsApp messages, text messages, all trying to infiltrate and for me to go, yes, I'm going to agree to communicate with you. And that, so I think in this day and age, you've got to be secure, right? Because it's
Mm.
not just about people using ChatGPT, it's a wider technology use question. And having a safe, secure environment for you, protecting yourself and your assets and your people and your staff and your relationships, trusted relationships are really hard to come by in the first place, right? How hard is it to sell to somebody new compared to someone
Mm.
you already know? So I'm of that opinion that given my background, my history, my sense of
What
by the
what
way,
is
I'm deeply
Mahmood,
private.
what is your background? So you think of a business, there's lots of different paths.
Sure,
Very rarely do I meet someone who's an expert in every single part of a business.
absolutely right.
But what is your expertise in that
I
big
spent
piece?
about 8 years in finance and auditing.
Yeah,
I spent 17 years in software, mainly ERP and business intelligence, and more latterly in robotic process automation. I spent about
yeah.
8 years in ITO and BPO, running practices around business intelligence, data warehousing, and analytics and data. Right. So I spent probably 2 years in AI with startups or other things. I've been a solopreneur for 6 years, and I spent 6 years as a non-executive director in an NHS body where we had a turnaround situation. And there I chaired finance and performance committees, was a member of audit and risk,
Mm-hmm.
chaired REMCOM, chaired conflict of interest, and was a member of the board. Right.
Got
So
ya. Okay.
that's a blend of different things of leadership, following, consulting,
And
and
then factoring into that, so coming at the other end of the screen, so I've been in sales for 25 years, in marketing for 12, in management for 15 of those years,
yeah.
um, in AI for a couple of years. We've got our own apps, etc. So across the screen, obviously, we've got the kind of the sales, the marketing, the finance nailed, the AI aspect. So what else are businesses having to think about, and what might we, what other aspects are AI going to play a part?
So,
First of all,
right. So in my experience, right, all the technology is about doing things faster, better, and more importantly, for many people, cheaper, right?
yeah.
And we're shifting the work mix of a human, right? If I look back to what I started with in the beginning of my career and where we are today and the possibilities, I mean, it's amazing. I'm so thankful for all the things we've got available to us, honestly, right?
Mm. But a lot of people, if you woke them up today aren't with us today, wouldn't recognize the world that was there 15, 20 years ago,
Indeed,
right?
indeed, right? So what I will say for everyone is that embrace it, right? Embrace this opportunity. Grab it with both hands and both feet, really. I think we're at the cusp of things that are fundamentally going to shift the way humans work, right? Even more, but it's happening faster than it did. We had big chunks of change, but they were slower to be adopted and implemented. This stuff is going to hit us like a tsunami.
Yeah, and it's going to be quick and it's going to be fast, but it's also not the only time. Like if you
No,
go back in history, it's not the only time where you've had a cosmic shift in terms of, you only have to take like the tractor, for example. Before that, a lot of the workforce was agricultural, but the minute you implemented a tractor, you only needed two people now to plow a
right.
field. So 98 people lost their jobs if it took 100 people to plow a field. But they found new jobs, right? So I think a lot of people are kind of the doom of AI is going to come along, all the jobs are going to go, but the likelihood is that those jobs that go, then there'll be new jobs created. And if people can learn now the kind of how you can use your IP with AI at speed, it's not that AI replace people, it's that there are things that AI needs people. It can't replace emotions. It can't replace some of that logic, that feeling, that energy, that gut that humans have.
So here's an interesting thing that I think is happening to everyone, especially in certain places, right? So if you are a business owner, chances are you're now getting bombarded with messages of some kind, and 50% of the time, I think, maybe more, it will have some kind of AI generated content. Now, I'm getting a bit more, I'm not cynical, but I'm getting more experience at ascertaining and identifying things that have been written by AI versus those that have been written by a human. So here's an interesting thing. I was on a webinar last week, and this issue of authenticity came up
Mm,
because whilst we want to embrace the change, whilst I agree with you that AI is shifting things, cosmically, as you said, I'm also of the opinion that only certain parts and skills and jobs will disappear, but they will be typically, like they've always been, the lower level, more manual based tasks. However, you and I know that people work with people, and I'm certainly a victim elder nowadays with IVRs, right? If I get an IVR, I'm like, what's the button I can press to get to talk to a human the quickest? And
mm,
normally it's like, do you want to sign up as a new customer? That gets me to a human more quickly than anything else, right? But and that's because I'm not a digital native. I was brought up with this, contact with humans is more important. I look at some of the younger generations, my children, for example, and some of the people coming out of school and college now, they're much more in tune with digital nativeness, and they have a, an empathy with communicating digitally that I don't have because I want
mm,
that contact with a human. I've also got to recognize that people who want contact with a chatbot are happy with it. It's quick and easy for them, and many people. We're losing certain skills. You've been in sales, I've been in sales. I was brought up in sales with pick up the phone, talk to people, right? Go and meet them physically. Then we shifted to Zoom
mm,
meetings, and now we're doing, email communications. And now we'll end up with a chatbot saying, "Do you want to buy it? Yes, no, okay, I'm bought, done." And you've done your Apple Pay, and off you go. And you haven't spoken to a single human in the sales cycle. So I
mm,
think we've got to look at things from a where does it all fit in? We have to become more used to using AI. I think everyone should learn as quickly as possible, but put it in the context of why would your business benefit from it? How would it benefit from it? These two questions have to go before deciding to choose some tech. And
mm,
that's the important point I think that many people are skipping because it's the hype. I've got to put ChatGPT in, right? Because everyone's using it. Well, hang on, why do you want it in the first place? What's it going to do for you? For those of us who are, in that generation world, my God, it's changed everything. In minutes, things that used to take me days and hours, right, or even some weeks, for example, I can now do within a modicum of time that is far superior than I ever had before.
mm,
For commercial people, sales, marketing, it has a boon, right? But it's also a how do I cut through the noise, going back to that question around data and data quality, right? The more we
mm,
have to play with, the more we have to work with, we've got more information, but then we need more time to qualify. So I think it's the fact that human plus AI is a winning combination. Just AI on its own, talking to other AI, goes back to that question of trust. Right now, because of what's happened, hand on heart, I would not trust anything that came out of an LLM or other AI tool, generative AI tool, and give it straight to a client. No way. I want a human to review everything before it gets anywhere near. I give it to someone else outside of my business, my organization.
Yeah, I think that's really important. One thing that I find interesting is that those age gaps and those age brackets. So you and I are of a certain generation, and then but if you take millennials and Gen Z, who are 50% of the population, by the way. So if I speak to, it's funny, if I speak to anyone over the age of 35, and they would say, well, I want to, I want to visit someone's website, and I want to, I want to look at, I want to do my research, I want to have a little look. But 49% of millennials and Gen Z will never visit your website. Those decisions are already made on social media. So
Right.
you could argue they're already kind of bypassing the way that we used to do things. But it
Yes,
is, for businesses, they've got to factor in. It's not something that's coming. That's now
it's here.
50% of the addressable market, and never going to visit your website, and never going to do things in the way that we used to do things or have always done things. So
Right.
even like from a social point of view, that AI content is going to kind of draft in. Now it's going to miss the authenticity boat completely. But what I find interesting as well is in that younger generation, I was doing another conversation not so long ago, and it was about leadership, and and it was talking about uh, Deloitte's global millennial and Gen Z survey that they did in the early part of this year.
Yes.
And 49% of Gen Z respondents said that they would leave a business within 18 months if it didn't align with their social and environmental values. And when it
Yes.
comes to buying decisions or who they would work for, 60% of half the population, and if you take that to account, say that they would research companies, and if they didn't meet those values on social media, they would not buy from them nor work for them. Um, so that's kind of flabbergasting. Maybe we just need to change when it factors in from AI and base everything around tomorrow's world, not the most of the leaders would be over 35, right?
I find it fascinating because the corollary of that is not just that the Gen Z millennials and the workforce and what they want to do and their social standing, but you've got to go back and
Mm,
saying 50% of buyers are now in that group of people, Gen Z and
mm.
millennials, which means their decisions made on buying and purchasing something are also going to be based on factors that another set of people haven't taken into account, right?
CSR, ESG.
All sorts of things, right?
Mm,
And causes, we've seen. I'm all for going with the times. You've got to flow and adapt. I think that the saying "adapt or die" is absolutely true at the moment, and this is why
mm.
the AI part is also important because those companies adapting AI are able to be more resilient as long as it's done with the right purposes. So the leadership part of framing awareness versus understanding versus intelligence. And there's another piece I would add to that, which is the wisdom. We've always gone in cycles of younger people working with more experienced people and a passing of that wisdom. But the passing of wisdom went two ways because it was the younger people teaching the older people as well. Here's new
And
thoughts, here's new
oh
ways of
yeah,
working. It's so important to take that into account. And therefore, reaching into your talent pool of people is equally important. That shift about I'll leave within 18 months. This is not a fad. It's a fact of life. And
mm.
already most sectors, if you ask them, then one of their top three challenges, finding the right skills is one of the top three challenges because we're also heading to a period where many people aren't going to go through the traditional routes to get into work.
And it's
I've got a
quite
friend of mine.
interesting. it's quite interesting as well, Mahmood. Sorry, I've cut you in a short there,
Not at
just
all.
because I'll forget. Um, but so young people as well, they've grown up in this social environment, which is why they're quite
Right.
happy to buy off social and never visit your website. Um, and but also they're probably in the AI environment, so they're ripe and probably the most experienced if you think in terms of talent. But maybe they're not going to be viewed that way by a lot of senior leadership. Maybe who
I think
haven't
this is,
thought of that. But the other thing is as well, and how do you nurture that? So there is kind of their values and their sense of belonging, and they're wanting to feel aligned to something, which is where they'll leave in 18 months if they don't feel the values are met. But you mentioned people work with people. I think we've given a few really valuable tips to leaders here. That's one thing I think is you also mentioned you're only as good as the questions that get asked. I think that's true in how we lead those young people, treat them as experts, make them feel valued and empowered, ask them questions and care, and then build a culture where they want to stay and feel part of something. And maybe they become the engine room of your future business.
in one of my leadership roles, one of the things I was
Mm,
most proud of was that we instituted a graduate team, apprentices as well, right? So we looked at it and
yeah.
said, we've got no way of
Fab.
bringing in young people apart from obviously if we've got a project or a program, we'll hire them in. But we need to institute a way that says we've got to bring in a new generation of future leaders, right? So partly, you do these things because you're thinking of not just making it cheaper to do the work, but you're thinking about where the future is going. And that's
Yeah.
a really important point that talent nurturing is so much more important. If a lot of stuff gets done that is automated, should we say, for want of a better word, right? AI is another case of automation, but if it's automated and done, machine to machine, then where humans are, we've got to build a different kind of person and a different set of skills. It's no longer enough to have people who know how to press buttons and follow up, a manual process. You've got to put in place those people who can ask those right questions, but also deal with how to deal with the outside world, right? So it's the internal and external view that you've got to create. Leaders are hard to find, right? So you've got to nurture and create them as well. And that brings another point, which is going back to the development side of things. It's not just that these young people come in and bring different ideas and thoughts, but they've got to give that back, and other people have to listen to them to say, here, there might be a better way than what you're doing already. And what typically
Mm,
happens, we have, I think politics and ego play a part, as they do everywhere. Uh, and open-mindedness is another area. But there is a shift, I think, in many learning and development organizations and consultancies and so on for trying to embed a growth mindset in companies. Right. And a growth mindset means that you're not thinking just about the growth of the company, you're thinking about the growth of people. And how do you make the growth of people? Well, you have an environment where they can ask questions, as you said, nurturing them, bringing them in, but allowing others to then share the wisdom and figure out what could be a good way of doing this right now. Because you can't just give carte blanche to young people who haven't had the war wounds and histories and experiences and scars of doing something. We've got to balance idealism and kind of academic theory or styles or ways of working with will it work in our culture and organization? What kind of culture do
mm,
we develop? And this is a really important point that the leadership side of things needs to think about allowing that to flow. And companies allow that to happen quicker and in a nicer way, in a smoother way, and an inclusive way. I don't mean it from an inclusive in terms of DEI. I'm thinking more in terms of everybody has uh, the right to have a voice, I think, and to be heard. Ultimately, you've got to have one set of decision makers, ultimately, right? You can't do it just off the back of consensus. I don't think that works. So the leadership part is to have enough to allow people to feel they're valued and heard so they don't disappear off, adopt the things that are going to work, and save the other things for let's go back and think about it again. What else can you come up with later?
mm. Sure. And that's going to be a really important part is the leaders that and leading differently, leading forward, so to speak. So one of the things I wanted to touch on is For a lot of if they're a business, if you're a business and you're watching and you haven't even, you know, it hasn't come to the top of your priority list, you haven't invested time nor money, have they missed the boat? How far behind are they? Where's the opportunity lie right now?
Listen, we're at the beginning of everything. We're still at the beginning of everything. 2 years in. Many of you, if you haven't, there's a great book by a very well acclaimed author and leader called Geoffrey Moore, who wrote a book called Crossing the Chasm.
Mm,
And there was another one he followed up about tornadoes. But Crossing the Chasm was about how products, services, and other things get adopted across the wider globe, right? So he talked about the fact that you have, the people who are the bleeding edge. So the bleeding edge are the people who in October 23, when OpenAI announced, got an account straight away and started playing with the LLM. They weren't going, what is this stuff? They dove in. They're the bleeding edge. Then you get the innovators. The people who come along a couple of months later and they did a bit of research and they're trying it out and they're experimenting and then they're putting in saying, can we use it? Can we put it together? And that's where you get generally a whole bunch of the techies, right? Not normally the business community, but you get all the techies who say, how does it work? What's the architecture? Where can we use it? How does it connect to stuff? What does it input? What does it output? And they started playing. And you can also track these things by forums in Reddit, right? They're great place. Reddit's a great place for research, by the way. If you're not using it, fascinating.
mm,
Because you can kind of spot things that blow up and trend and say, okay, this is stuff we've got to trend and look out what's coming down the line. And then you get the change from the techies to kind of more business folks saying, how do I apply what the techies are telling me and the tech platform or tool can do to a real life problem? And they'll do, this is
mm.
where you get proof of concepts and proof of values. But the whole point of this that I'm trying to say is, even with that, we're still at the kind of 1% of the world is really truly using AI in a business sense. Let's forget the big corporates, right? Because they've got much deeper pockets and they would have been doing this for, as we talked about, 75% of financial services. And everybody knows about quantitative trading and the fact they used to take all the PhDs and rocket scientists. Well, that was because they were writing AI. That's what they wanted them for. So everybody out there, don't feel like you missed the boat. You've still got time. We're still in the early adoption phase. It hasn't crossed the chasm.
And
It is not accepted business
and
use.
it's still the learning phase, isn't it? Even down to the big companies, even down
Yes,
to the deal recently with OpenAI and Oracle, and that was all about data, right?
yes. And
Um,
NVIDIA with NVIDIA and OpenAI, was it this morning
yeah,
or yesterday morning?
about
Right?
improving, and so everybody's still improving. So you're right. It's still an opportunity and still so so what do people need to think about? What would they take away? So we talked about some of the leaderships, training on prompt engineering, looking
Yeah.
at how you value your staff, creating culture, looking at your data and making sure that that's in order so that you can get ahead of the game. Um, a lot of tools out there, so maybe a lot of fatigue around
So,
that.
I can't remember what the number was, but I think 85 or 95% of the last Y Combinator cohort was all AI, right? So that means where the
Yeah,
money is being invested is going to these tools, right? So it's going into places that are going to shift the way we want to work.
which is
So,
interesting. According to gov.uk, Mahmood, employment AI related was up 34% in the
yeah.
start of this year. And UK AI related revenue jumped £23.9 billion in 2024.
I mean,
Massive.
it just goes to show. I mean, £260 million went into the grants for AI for companies and academics, right? In the last funding round, we've just had another 26 million last week when our good friend from across the pond popped over and Microsoft and AWS and others then invested in data centers, right? So we're going to see a constant push for this. The interesting fact is that alongside those statistics you mentioned was the fact that salaries have gone up by 40% with those people who are saying, I've got experience in AI. You've got to prove it, but there's now a 40% gap between those with and those without AI experience.
Mm.
So I go back to the key thing, which is like with everything, link it to outcomes. What are you trying to do? Think about where do you need the most support in doing things faster, better, cheaper. Picking one use case, only one, something that's irking you and saying, can we solve it with AI and automation?
Yeah.
Right? I had a case, and this is a real story, right? So I had a friend of mine. He was talking to somebody about, he's in recruitment, and they provide, nurses, domestic care workers, and so on. And he was looking at putting in an AI voice agent to do the calling, right? Ringing up people, all the rest of it. Um,
Yeah.
and he spent quite a few months researching, playing around, to the point he even tried to create one himself, right?
Yeah.
Now, he's probably unusual because he's a smaller business than I would expect to happen. But you can see what's happening is that in the end, his choice was, I'm going to outsource it to a couple of companies abroad in India because I want humans talking to humans. Because when he looked at it, the total cost of ownership of that use case didn't make economic sense for him as a business. And this is a really important point. You can get swayed and really hyped up through the tech and what it can do. But if you haven't got a compelling business case or an outcome that you're after, what is the point of doing it that way? And then it goes back to that question, which I've always used, which is, do you build, do you buy, or do you do nothing? So in
Mm.
terms of, beyond AI and what really moves the needle, it always goes back to what's the outcome you're trying to achieve? Can it be done by building it? Can it be done by buying it? Or can you do it by not doing anything and tweaking something else?
So nothing's changed.
And I don't think that even with AI, I think the speed of decision making has changed. That has changed because you know what? One of the things about that generational shift between millennials and Gen Zs and the new alphas, right? And the boomers and the Gen X is the speed of responsiveness. Now, it is clear everywhere with all statistics, whether it's LinkedIn, social, emails, or other things. If you can respond within minutes or seconds, you're more likely to go further within the sales cycle than if you hold off and then come back to it later. Speed of
Mm.
responsiveness, even in things like customer support, inquiries, all these kind of things, we're seeing a fundamental shift across the board in how responsive you can be. And I think AI has got a great part to play here because it can be scanning. And before it, our RPA that I was in was always scanning for things and saying, if something happens, do something. And I think this is
Mm.
the fundamental shift we need to think about very carefully in business is how communicative are we? And the more communicative we are and can engage with our clients, customers, and prospects faster, there's more chance that you will do a greater success in terms of staying in business, improving business, growing your business than those organizations who take longer.
Yeah, I mean, it's the difference between doubling your revenue, right?
Yeah.
It's that important, the speed of responsiveness. Let's just touch very briefly on infrastructure and data and costs, and because there's kind of two two people up to bat in different worlds.
So we haven't yet seen what is going to cost people to keep running with the LLMs, right? There was somebody I spoke to, and we did a query, we did a simple prompt, and it was about, tell me about sustainability options, all the rest of it. And we calculated that the cost of the query, right, was way more than the answer. So it turned out that when you add in the compute, the chips, the electricity, the data center costs, the connectivity, the communications, all sorts of other things, we're in negative territory, right? The costs are higher than what potentially you might get as value. And we're adding more data centers, we're adding more. At what point can UK PLC, for example, or any other country PLC absorb those costs for electricity and power and compute? So it's interesting that we're building more stuff, but At what point? Because we're now suddenly having more wind turbines, are we? Solar farms, are we? They're announced, but are they actually contributing? Because what seems to happen, if you look at the figures from government websites, is that yes, we do have more renewable energy than we ever had before, but frequently the situations aren't such that we can keep on using them, and they have to switch back to gas-fired power engines.
It's like when you look at the EV world, and there's a whole other kind of minefield that we could go down. We could spend another hour and a half
Not
talking
today, not
about that,
today.
Mahmood. Not today, yeah. But the reality is exactly the same. So what on the face of it, sometimes is a good thing to do. There's this kind of almost shadow side to that, which is, well, what's entailed with that, and obviously we're very front leading with how fantastic EV is, but
Yeah,
we're not very front leading from a news and a marketing point of view for obvious reasons
right.
about what's over here. And so that's a really interesting point for people to be thinking about is AI is one thing over here and it's fabulous for what it is, and there's money and there's speed and there's a whole new world. But over here, what does that mean? And that's
If you
not
got the
being
right, if you
emphasized.
got access to the right people, and so I'm giving somebody, everybody out here some advice, and that is you don't have to use any of this technology from a cloud perspective. It's still possible in this day and age to install things locally, right?
Mhm.
And there is now a concept of small language models, right? SLMs. So apart from the large language models, there's now the ability, and many enterprises are doing this, they're installing versions of ChatGPT's models locally within their
And for
own.
those that don't understand in terms of open source, closed
Yes,
source, so closed source, which I think ChatGPT was
it still is.
originally, well, it was open source, I think, originally, and then they
Oh,
made it
yes. Okay.
closed source to protect
Yes.
their investment. But so you're talking about for those from a technical point of view, taking open source data and then building your effectively your own small LLM on your own server.
See, there is something that people need to understand is that just because these public models exist, you can create your own version. Enterprises are taking their data and using the capabilities of those tool sets and platforms like ChatGPT and combine it to create closed data sources, i.e., their own proprietary language models, from which
Hmm.
they can then attach their other applications and data sources and do some work internally, right? So it's not exposed to the wider world. Smaller businesses have that same opportunity. There are many tools and processes and means and methods for getting something installed locally so you're not exposing yourself to that broader. And this also solves the
And
privacy problem and the
and
security
how
problem.
would they go about that?
Well, the thing is, one, you've got to make a decision about whether AI is going to help you first. Then you're into that question of what works best for us as we build out. Because at some point, I think having access to the wider enterprise level models is of benefit to you as a business, right? Because trillions of parameters is better than a few billion, but it's still a lot.
And
And I
it's
think
new trainings, constantly updated, refreshed.
absolutely right. So somebody else is doing that heavy lifting is shifting for you. It's a bit like the old days of snapshots of data. You took a snapshot, the world keeps on spinning, new stuff's added, but you've got something that is worked well for a time, but it's deprecating all the time in terms of its validity. So for
Hmm.
me, it's a question of saying if I'm conscious of security, if I'm conscious of cost, if I'm conscious of controlling what I do with it, and I've got very simple, should we say, use cases where I feel it's going to benefit the business we're in, it's a viable alternative to put in some open source stuff, work. And if you're not unhappy, that some of the Chinese models like DeepSeek are free and open source, there are a couple of others now, uh, and you can connect local automation tools, no code platforms, and so on to that open sourced. So it means you've got a way to, because the one thing that we haven't talked about at the moment, which is really important, is that once you go beyond the kind of single user Teams version and you start integrating these tools with your existing technology stacks, then you're in the world of APIs and token consumption, which is a whole nother ballgame. and another
Mm,
minefield of cost.
yeah, and that can become costly if you don't know what you're doing.
Definitely, and it it racks up to thousands and tens of thousands per month if you want to make things more automated and interconnected. So there's the other side of things. We didn't talk about it, but how does AI fit within your existing technology architecture and business
Yeah,
architecture?
and just briefly, when you talk about things like that, it brings into account tools like Lovable and Replit and Famous AI, and you know. But I don't know if have you used one of those? I have. I want to tell you a story about that. But you've used it. I used Replit and I built a website, and then I got what started a very simple website, and then I thought, oh, wow, this is really good because the AI is doing all the coding. I'm coming up with all the ideas. This is a
Yeah,
match made in heaven. And then I got a bit more technical and I was like, well, why don't we put a back end on? Why don't we
yeah,
put a client portal on? And why don't we? And I got a bit carried away. And then AI got confused. And I think the context window, it all got confused. And
right.
the, then I was going in and to fix one thing, I'd fix that and I'd go, brilliant, that's fixed. And then I realized it's broken that bit. And then fixed that bit, it broke hours. And in the end, I went, oh, that's not for me. Like I can see if you build something simple, it's fine. But
It's like everything, if you want something that is secure and scalable, right? And product development is a minefield. I think these tools like Lovable and so on are great. There's a really interesting thing that came out this year. We've got 4-year computer science graduates coming out in Silicon Valley. They don't have jobs this year. Why? Because a lot of the coding has been taken up by Cursor, Claude, Code, ChatGPT, and so on. And they're now sitting there going, I've got all this mountain of debt. What job am I going to get? And they're working in Starbucks, right? Which they never
yeah,
thought they'd end up doing. But we are seeing a fundamental shift. So whilst we're having issues right now, I think 18 months time, we're going to see a bigger shift to more automated development because you're going to end up doing what we did before, which is building up little libraries, little best practices, little objects, and all the rest of it in an ecosystem that says we can pass these around. And for those that don't know, there are now two protocols out there to help these tools talk to each other, MCP and A2A. So again, we haven't touched on agents, which is another thing coming down the line. For another day, we also think about quantum computing, which is also going to break things, and it's not far away. We thought 2035. I was talking to somebody the other day, and we are maybe 18 months away from true, more generalized quantum computing being available. And already
mm.
quantum computing has hacked RSA cryptography, right?
And
So,
also, for anyone thinking, oh well, it's not that much of a big thing. I think you mentioned accounting before, and I saw a stat not so long ago from uh, PwC that said that 80% of accounting tasks will be automated. I think
yeah.
it was within the year.
Well, listen,
So that only leaves advisory, right?
well, there's other things, right? FP&A analysis is still a big space to play in because,
Yeah.
again, many people don't understand that budgeting and forecasting. But certainly, when I joined the world of RPA, one of the things I envisioned, and we were having conversations with partners such as PwC and some of the MBB crowd, as well as other technology partners, we were looking at robot to robot audits, right? So PwC would come along with their robot auditor, and the robot finance department would give the answers, and they talk to each other every month. And you would just have, we assure this, we don't assure it, kind of situation. We're not there yet. It's going to take a few years, but certainly talking to each other, that integration is happening as we speak. The vibe coding, the Replit, the Lovable, the bolts, and so on you mentioned earlier, these are great starting points for people to get going. I've got kids, children or friends of mine, and so on. They're building mini apps and they're getting into this world. Now, here's an interesting thought for you. In this environment where AI can become more pervasive in your business, are you going to be a product company as well as a whatever kind of business you are? Because if you've got these kind of tools and you've got a business problem, isn't it easier to build something to solve that one problem than go out to somebody and say, let me build, quote me for a software development for an app for a mobile app or for a platform or something else. We could just do it in-house and have young people come in at 16, 18 who know these tools, could start the vibe coding, and then you have another couple of people who can further develop that you might have on tap as an outsourced party.
Possibly. It's going to change the way that people do things, isn't it?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so talk to me around what is it that you're working on at the moment? If I was to ask you the question, for our audience, how they could get value from what you're doing at the moment, or who would you be looking for? Who would you want to speak to if you could frame that?
So one interesting area is actually salespeople, right? Salespeople have got a tough task because our salespeople are irrelevant now in some ways, right? We've got these facts and figures you said about millennials and Gen Zs and alphas coming through saying, we don't want to talk to anybody, we just buy, right? We make decisions purely on, I've seen it on social, I've done this, I've talked to my friends, we just click. And with SaaS platforms, it's easy to do. The issue is that when you get beyond the kind of personal productivity type tools, and you want to then think about a set of people doing this, right? 3, 4, 5 more, you're into a different ball game, and that's where you still need salespeople. Now,
Mm.
one of the things I'm looking at is how can you use and research better to go and work with people. So, for example, one of the things I use quite a bit is Notebook LM. I think you and I have had a discussion about this first. And what I do with Notebook LM, I try and build a picture of a person, a profile. How far does it sit with the ICP? Can I create an ICP with the tools we've got, for example? If I can train it, feed it, here's what I'm interested in. What does my ideal client look like? When I get the ideal client, can I get the LLM to actually create me a real person or a job description, or to the point of view where I'm saying, okay, for the kind of work I do, I'm looking for a mid-40s male. He's got 2 kids. One maybe at private school already. The other one is preparing to go through it, or they're going for 11 plus. They live in the home counties. They work 60 hours a week, right? They're really instrumental in helping 6 or 7 people who are like family to them in their business, and he's wondering about, how do I keep it all running? The economic environment is so and so, and actually get to a really detailed picture. You've got the ability to do that now. And then feed it. Once I meet a real person, I download the LinkedIn profile, for example. You can get that as a PDF. I feed it to Notebook LM. I can ask questions. Tell me a bit about this. So I can get to know the person a bit better. And if you're a fan of social selling, which many people are these days, you can go and do some extra data enrichment to go and find out more
Yep.
about the person. And then you reach out with a personalized message. So you used AI to do the grunt work, but you're using your own human authenticity to write the original, but you could craft a message that is engaging and built on solid information and research information that you can back up. Now, for salespeople, this is shifting the mindset of how they want to work. And given that
Mm.
everyone's struggling at the moment to improve their sales cycles. I've seen somewhere in certain industries, we've gone from 4 months to 10 months for sales cycles, right? We're seeing bigger companies really squeezing people on cash flow. So that has another impact. So when I look at the kind of things that I'm working on, sales training, building a culture where you're looking at how can you use the tools we've got at our disposal better, it's no longer about just going to Apollo and Lusher and building some stuff. It's actually deeper than that. I can ask questions that I would ask like, in a human conversation. I can ask the profile from a LinkedIn and engage with it. I can create an audio summary and take that with me and listen to it in the car 5 minutes before I'm about to meet someone. I could do a longer thing that actually is personalized to the person I'm talking to based on real information to create them a little video overview of what I do. Because I can feed what I do to that same notebook, combine it with the information I've got about them, and then prepare something that says, here's a little video I made for you. Hope it's of interest and relevant to what you're working on today.
Mm.
And it's something different, right? Because you're being human. You're not reaching out with
So they need different skill
messages.
sets right now. And also, I think as well, when you factor into that, so we and again, it's a conversation for another day, but a lot of people who watch the channel will know I talk a lot about AEO and GEO and
Yes. Oh my
kind of
goodness.
Yeah, so if people are trying to find you, then AI has a lot to answer for. If it says your name, it kind of goes into this. It's always going to give 3 to 5 providers in a
Sure.
generative chat. And so if you're one of those three, it becomes like the old school tender, you know? So in that argument, when you fast forward, and I forget the stat now, but it's something like 50% of all according to Gartner, I think it was, or one of those big bodies, 50% of all discovery is going to be company names mentioned by AI um,
Yes.
by 2027. That's 50%. That's massive. So anyone who's trying to find anybody is going to want to be known to AI. So I find that fascinating because if you do reach that stage and you've done a good job in terms of your data and your content and your, learning about how to infiltrate and be the name spoken within AI, and that's a first mover opportunity, that that creates a different world for salespeople because you don't need salespeople. If you're already
Ah,
in the tender, you need closers and
yes.
who are going to work in the way that you're thinking about.
So there are a couple of things, right? As well as kind of advising boards on and owners, right, on
Mm,
should you use AI in the first place? Because obviously I've got the enterprise application skills, the outsourcing skills, as well as AI and technology. Moving beyond that piece to say, how do we engage with the people that buy from us, right? So it goes back to that piece of, do we know who our buyers are, right? What market are we in? How do we address them in a different way? Because I can't remember the number, but is it 27 touch points or something before someone will engage with you and they're 80% down the buying journey at that point already?
yeah,
If
and
you're in
they'll have
that place,
researched you in massive detail. They know a lot about you
okay,
data-wise.
and you as a salesperson don't know anything about them when they connect. So that means your speed of response to go back and find that research is going to be so important. You're right in the sense of closure, yes, but I still believe that salespeople who are going to do well to close have to understand something called mutual value alignment. And this is something that's misunderstood. Value selling is where this closure piece happens, right? They may have almost come close, but they've got to go back to that trust element. Can I trust you with this money that I'm going to spend? Right? I'm going to
Mm,
trust you with the delivery. Am I going to trust you with the support? And in a world of SaaS where we churn, I can't remember the actual number, but people spend 2 or 3, 4, 5, 6 months and they churn from a SaaS product. It's really poor at the moment. Therefore, if you're a business trying to decrease your costs and improve your revenue, that keeping a customer is very important because they're your future reference points to get other customers, right? They're the ones who are going to recommend you on socials and elsewhere to say, you need to be with these guys. So I think it's important to have a blend of the closure part, but they've got to learn skills that says, where do I create the emotional gaps that make it easy to do that? You're clearly thinking of doing something. Let me be the one to take you and execute your vision. And that executing your vision is about understanding their value drivers.
and the thing there is as well, you come from an age we both do from sales and marketing aspect of, well, people buy from people. So in some ways that should be really simple. And also I'm a firm believer in that it's how you make people feel
Yes,
that they'll remember and want to work
definitely.
with you. So and that probably comes into exactly what you've just been saying. The more you know about somebody, the more well researched you are, the more that you get that inner workings of somebody and why they tick and their energy and what they do, the more likelihood that they're gonna feel that. The better you are at questioning as well. It's not the fact feature benefit kitchen
No,
sink that was thrown at me when I started out 25 or 27
yes.
years ago. That's changed. It's now all
Yeah.
about them, right?
Well, I've been a demo dolly, right? I've sat there and said, here it is, right? Here's feature function benefit, right? Been there, done it.
Yeah.
And the one thing that every time we went along, if you're in any kind of business where you're trying to convince someone else, you've got to speak their language. So if I were to go back and say, of everything you're trying to do, does your value proposition care about your customer's customer? If it doesn't, you've got some work to do to think about how you're going to make it appear that way. Because They're buying you to help them do something so they can do something. It's the nature of anybody, unless you're B2C, right? In B2C, even there, you've got you're providing an offer or a service or a product that someone will consume or use. But for business to business, which I think most of my experience has been in, right? And maybe most of the audience here listening, perhaps today, is business to business. I don't know, right? But if you're in business to business, you've got to think about what you're doing to help your customers move their needles. And that's what I mean about the mutual value alignment. You've got to make sure their vision of what they want to do for their customers, you're going to help them achieve.
It's all about value creation and authenticity in today's world, right?
Yeah. And again, you can't be the I know everything kind of salesperson anymore because you don't. You cannot be in their shoes. What you've got to understand is, what are the steps they've got to take for you to be trusted by them? And earning trust is what your job as a salesperson needs to be about today.
Yeah. So what so who can you work with if I gave you the 30-second 1 minute elevator pitch, who do you want to work with? What are you looking for?
So I'm looking for, again, ambitious or people who've got a fundamental challenge that they've got to fix right now. So, I've been used to doing things quickly, returning results quickly because I'm about operational. I'm not a strategic big picture. Here, I think you should be doing this, and here's a roadmap for the next 10 years. I'm very much practical in that I look at the big picture, but I look at small, sharp things that work within a few weeks and months. And that's typically with small boards, medium-sized companies who are either expanding, scaling, or they're looking for a sanity checkpoint. Because I come with a triple view lens of both finance, commercial, and technology, it's slightly different when I look at what they've got as a challenge. And because I've
Mm.
been in their shoes of trying to both buy and sell and manage people and teams, then those war wounds and stories, the frameworks and templates I use come along
And
and help
as an ex-auditor, they might want you to take a look at their financials as well. But
them.
um, listen, Mahmood, it's been a pleasure having you on. So we'll wrap the conversation up. I'm going to put a link to Mahmood's LinkedIn in the comments so that you
Thank
can
you.
make contact if you have a project that you want to work on. Then do. But yeah, it's been a pleasure having you on. I've enjoyed the conversation. I think we've covered a lot of ground. So hopefully our viewers have found that useful. Any final words?
Look, like with everything, we're all fallible. We're all humans, but we need to keep being human. And where we can, let's use tools to help us do things better for the people around us. That's from my perspective, is that technology has always been an opportunity to do things better, right? Learn more about what it can do. We don't always have the time, but that's where people like yourself, myself, and others come along to say, quickly, we can help you get to speed. And I think right now, up your game in awareness, right? Be aware of the use cases, be more aware of what is out there, what your competitors are doing. Do a horizon scan of, even ask the chat GPT the question saying, in my market, give it the market, this is my size, these are my ideal customers. What's going on out there? What are people doing with AI? And you will find amazing stories of really good, clever stuff that isn't too difficult to implement. And is then be brave enough to make a decision to do something about it. Act. Don't sit there and go, and I'll do it next week and next month. Take a small action, small one.
Wise words. And then go and apply, fail, and then learn fast, right?
Absolutely. Iteration is the name of the game with AI. I will say that one thing. The more you iterate and experiment, the more comfortable you become.
Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.
And thank you, Dean, for hosting me. Really enjoyed it.
More than welcome.